you all here today as we gather to celebrate the birthday of our 27th President, William Howard Taft. For those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Parikh, and I'm the board chair of the Friends of the William Howard Taft Legacy. My fellow board members here today is Danielle Barth, Jim Streckfus, Jason Alexander, most of you know, Ed Lloyd, I think, is coming in here as well, and Steve Camp. Ken and Molly can be with us today, unfortunately, but we're keeping them in our thoughts and prayers. So on behalf of our organisation and our partners at the National Park Service, I'd like to thank you for joining us on this special occasion. Today marks the 6th anniversary of Taft Day, and actually the 40th year that the Friends Group has been in motion. And we're honoured to have you here with us. As many of you know, William Howard Taft holds the unique distinction of being the only man in American history to serve as both President of the United States and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. This alone speaks volumes about his deep commitment to the public service and his profound understanding of the law. But it's not just the positions he had that made him remarkable, it's the character with which he held them. William Howard Taft was known for his integrity, his fairness, and his unwavering dedication to justice. He believed that the law was the foundation of a healthy democracy and that it must be upheld with the highest standards of impartiality and respect. His calm and thoughtful approach to governance, coupled with his belief in the rule of law, made him a true statesman and an enduring example of what it means to serve the public good. As we celebrate Taft's life and legacy today, I encourage you to consider joining the Friends of the William Howard Taft Legacy. Our mission is to preserve and share the values that Taft embodied, and by becoming a member, you can help us to continue his important work. Together, we can ensure that Taft's remarkable contributions and those of his family are remembered and celebrated for generations to come. Thanks again for being with us this morning, folks. And now it's my great honor to introduce a friend of the board, Stuart Garnett from Taft Law. Stuart.
Well, welcome on behalf of Taft, Janice, and Hollister, founded by the son, the elder son of William Howard Taft, Robert A. Taft. And my role here is very simple. I'm going to introduce the fellow who, more so than anyone else, was responsible for having Taft lectures, and that was Pat Fisher. Pat is a former president of the Cincinnati Bar Association, former president of the Ohio State Bar Association, currently sitting justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, who 7, 8, 9 years ago said, you know, they've got these lectures that they give for these other Ohio presidents, why don't we have one for Taft? So thank you for getting us all involved in this, and Mr. Justice Fisher.
That's true. Running 16 for the statewide office, I did 100,000 miles for the state of Ohio and visited all 88 counties. And there would be a Rutherford B. Hayes Day, James Garfield Day, Ulysses S. Grant birthplace, be invited to all of them. And I always knew that William Howard Taft was the only person in Cincinnati, that is, anybody, who'd been president and chief justice. And how could we ignore that when other towns are celebrating Rutherford B. Hayes in 3 months, you know? So anyway, I'm here to introduce Clerk, of course, Pavan and his assistant, Executive Director Jason Alexander. We're going to talk with him, lectures from the National Constitution Center, talked about William Howard Taft's view of the Constitution. We've had people talk about his days as Solicitor General. Today we're going to hear from 2 people that want to talk about William Howard Taft and Hamilton County, which I think is very important. I mean, yeah, he did a lot of stuff. He was provisional governor of the Philippines, Secretary of War for 4 years, a whole lot of stuff. But I haven't heard anybody until today talk about him in Hamilton County being a lawyer, which I know a lot of people in the audience are lawyers from here. So without further waste of time, listen to me, Jason Alexander.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Alexander. I have the honor of now having served, working for the Clerk courts for the last 24 years, literally half of my life. My current role is Director of the Central Services Division, where I oversee the Courthouse Mail Center. We process the mail for 31 different county agencies. The Record Center that houses our dwindling paper record supply, and the Court Archives, of course. In addition to that, I also served as the Secretary of the Hamilton County Records Commission, which is a collaboration between several county agencies, and it all is connected with records retention and record disposal, and following state required guidelines. And I, of course, serve as a board member for the Friends of the Taft Legacy. It is an incredible honor to be here with you all today to enjoy and partake in the rich Taft Legacy, but also share with you some of the discovery of our recent historical records concerning former President and Supreme Court Justice William Howard Taft. Our journey into the Taft Court relic started in early 2022, and in the most unexpected of ways. I received, I don't think it was a phone call, I believe, or an email, it was actually a phone call from a reference librarian of all places in the Supreme Court of Ohio Library. The only thing that they can convey to me at the time was there was allegedly a case from 1869 involving Alfonso Taft, and the kicker was it involved whiskey somehow. Nothing else to go on, absolutely nothing. All that I pretty much knew is, yes, there was a Superior Court of Cincinnati, very rare and unique in its own right, as there were only 4 others to have existed in the entire state. And Alfonso Taft had actually served on that bench. This request came from a chemical engineering professor from UC Davis named Craig Miller, who's an amateur whiskey maker. In developing a course, he was doing some fact checking for a class, wanted to mix a little bit of history, and wanted to, fact check this and not teach anything that was not correct. Could have taken the easy way out. I didn't even have a name of any of the parties, and I would have been totally justified in saying, we can't even commence a search on this. But I was somehow intrigued, and I decided to not call it a day. So the short version of the story went that in 1869, the Japanese government, upset over their citizens drinking American-made whiskey, became ill, and some even died. One batch had allegedly been traced back to a whiskey wholesaler located in the city of Cincinnati. After a thorough online search, I was able to find 2 online articles and 2 books that referenced this case, but they all provided me at the time valid clues that this might have actually happened. One of these was an online article titled Japanese Whiskey Rules, which was written by a whiskey writer from Australia. This article actually referenced a U.S. federal court case in which Judge Alfonso Taft found in favor of the Japanese plaintiff, thereby making this the first ruling ever in the world addressing a whiskey's product and identity. There was also an additional article located online from the same individual, this time in Whiskey Chronicles of Edmund Taylor Jr., Part 4, Bluegrass Distilling Empire. It was written that President Taft's father, Judge Alfonso Taft, presided over the world's first case on whiskey, standards brought by the Japanese government in 1869. Next, I found 2 books written by 2 different whiskey authors from Kentucky. One alluded to the fact that the first legal challenge to the rectifiers came not from American distilleries, but from the government of Japan, and again mentioned Judge Alfonso Taft. Second book highlights the alleged fact that this case that the Japanese government had brought against the distillery had received a favorable ruling from Judge Taft when he ruled that a product containing neutral spirits could not be called straight whiskey. I basically turned this into a worldwide 6-week investigation. I reached out to everyone, to former Governor Bob Taft. Yeah, most of you know this. It was very in-depth. I reached out to former Governor Bob Taft, the ambassador to Japan's office in DC, trade organizations, Japanese whiskey trade groups, you name it. What I found was a mixture of intrigue, but mostly people having absolutely no information whatsoever anywhere on this at all. I decided to look through our old microfilm indexes, the ones that were filmed with the moniker of mutilated, an indication that these were recreated from the mutilated indexes that were destroyed in the 1884 fire. Pavan will share more on that later. Many records were lost during the fire, but some had been recovered and recreated. Was not able to find anything in our indexes, but what we did find was perhaps another little carrot, just enough to lend some kind of credibility that our now ghost whiskey case may exist. In the August 25th edition, 1900 edition of the Japan Weekly Mail, there was an article titled The White Whiskey Case, in which an American importer attempted to import a highly rectified whiskey to Japan known as white whiskey. This was done in 2 installments, and each installment was assessed at a different tariff. One of them at the steep rate of 250%. In 1900, this was considered quite a high-profile case, an incident that would ultimately land on the desk of the then Secretary of State. In another article search, I finally found a solid connection between Alfonso Taft and whiskey, but again, not the whiskey case. While serving as United States Attorney General, he actually did issue an official agency opinion regarding whiskey or alcohol, his response to the request from the then Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. And next, would you believe, another Taft whiskey connection, this time involving William Howard Taft. In 1909, he would issue a decision known as the Taft decision. Apparently, even William Howard Taft had grown tired of the bickering that was occurring between various government agencies and industry insiders as to the legal definition of whiskey. In essence, what was really occurring during this time were people hijacking the definition of whiskey, those people being lobbyists for street bourbon. The result of all of this chicanery would be the request of President Taft to convene what would be months of congressional committee hearings, along with testimony from members of the government's Pure Food Department and from various distilleries. The culmination of which would ultimately lead to Taft issuing an executive order, not in defining whiskey, as he was very clear to point out, but rather explaining that his order now allowed consumers to know what is now meant when the industry uses the term straight whiskey. This went not to the chemistry aspect of whiskey, but more to the heart of false advertisers and makers providing false statements about what's in the bottle. Undoubtedly an aspect that probably tugged at his moral and lawyer-like heartstrings. If this was truly, this is the question we were left with, if this was truly the impactful case as this had been portrayed to believe, why are there no external sources or mentions about this outside of the whiskey writers themselves? Our strongest belief is that when you add everything up, these were whiskey writers talking about legal matters. When you take into consideration, it is very well within the realm of possibility that a legal opinion from Attorney General Alfonso Taft about whiskey, along with the white whiskey case, along with the Taft decision from 1909, could have been misconstrued, creating a confluence of factors that led to what I now coined the ghost whiskey case. And speaking about all this research with Jim Dempsey, our volunteer archivist, he casually mentioned to me one day that we have boxes of satisfactions, a particular type of legal filing, that survived the 1884 fire out of our record center. He said that he'd started having them brought down to my office. After a few boxes arrived, still reeling from disappointment of not finding the whiskey case, I started to rummage through the boxes to see what we had. I noticed that due to the nature of these filings, just about every single one had a signature of an attorney on them. I thought to myself, I wonder if there are any Taft signatures. After a few days of sifting through some of these, I was able to locate a filing with Alfonso's Taft signatures on it. This gave me hope that I could find one of William Howard Taft, but that hope eluded me until a few weeks ago, as all of you likely now know. Recently, our office was able to forge an agreement to retrieve even more of the historic records that we knew survived the 1884 fire. The records have been requested by the state to be sent to the Blegan Library at the University of Cincinnati, rather than being destroyed. Among some of these historic records was one box containing case files from the now defunct Superior Court of Cincinnati. That is the same court that not only Alfonso Taft sat on, as mentioned prior, but years later, his son, William Howard Taft, would also sit on the same court, being appointed in 1887 by Governor Joseph B. Foraker, and thus beginning his judicial career. As I went through this box, being that we had never actually seen an entire Superior Court case file intact, all of them were somewhat interesting, but others, for various reasons, others more than some. Oftentimes, however, there wasn't any aspect of one that entitled to be reserved any more than the other, but a particular one that I had just laid my hands on did. Clustered among its fellow cases, in case number order, sitting in a box that you've seen for the last 38 years, was a pale blue jacket number 39822. What caught my attention wasn't the number, but it was what was written at the very bottom of the case jacket. Lloyd and Taft and Pfluger, plaintiff's attorneys. The natural thought occurred, of course, what if in this pale blue jacket contained an original signature of the one and only William Howard Taft. So I carefully opened the case jacket that now, after almost a century and a half, was now wrapped in what had become brittle string or twine in respect. After a few seconds, I was in awe and disbelief. Inches from me was a civil petition filed by William Howard Taft on July 25th, 1884, with the signature of him as attorney of record. This relic, when you think about it, taking up residence in our prior courthouse, in our present courthouse, and the time that it was housed at UC had been hiding for the last 40 years. And what's more, in that time, it has probably not literally seen the light of day for the last 38 years. I want everyone to think about this. We now know what history thinks and knows about William Howard Taft. We know about his achievements, his accolades, his speeches, his executive orders. But this was signed at a time way before that. This was signed when he was an attorney who had just graduated law school 4 years prior, 25 years before becoming President of the United States, 37 years before becoming Chief Justice. And another amazing thing to think about, knowing what we know about him now, when he pressed his pen upon that document and signed it on that 25th day of July in 1884, we know that in all likelihood, he didn't possess dreams of becoming president. But in 1884, at the young age of 27, he already had the hope and dream and aspiration of achieving that lifelong dream of one day becoming Chief Justice. In closing my part, when you think of the records that were destroyed and the ones that could have been destroyed by fire, along with the potential man-made disasters, that of which not knowing what valuable records you have, and thereby not safeguarding and in some instances disposing of them, I think it underscores something important, incredibly important. It's the gratitude that we owe to all of the dedicated archivists out there, or the guardians of history, that knew not only the importance of that particular record, but perhaps the important place in history that these records would someday possess. For instance, one could not look on the Taft signature in 1884 as we look at it today. 140 years later, it holds an entirely different place in history than when it was signed. I'm now going to turn things over to the Clerk of Courts, Pavan and Parikh, who will talk more about the context of the day in which this document was signed and what William Howard Taft's early days as a lawyer might have been like. Thank you all so very much.
Imagine what my day was like when I'm sitting at my desk and Jason comes in and says, "So I got this call from the Supreme Court. What's it about? Whiskey. Go on." There's this record somewhere that we may have, we may not have, we don't know what's going on. Can I go look into it? Go for it, Jason. And I'm glad that he was able to relay the full story, because that is really how we got integrated with the Tafts and these stories and this history. And it's really because Jason likes history and likes whiskey and decided to dive in, and we said, go for it. Let's go see what you can find. So I just want to say thank you to both Taft Law and Friends of the Taft Legacy for inviting Jason and me to provide some remarks on the 6th annual Taft Day, celebrating the birth of Chief Justice, President, and son of Cincinnati, William Howard Taft. I am honored to be able to lend some insights into his life as a young attorney and some of the lessons we may learn as we examine our modern political climate. As you just heard Jason detail, our involvement in the Taft family actually began looking into records focused more around Alfonso Taft, the founder of the Cincinnati Bar Association, his father. Yet, as we began to unravel the full context of that time in our community's history, we held out hope that we could find something to help ground the icon that William Howard Taft became, a time in his life where he was just a local attorney, learning to practice law and make his mark on the world. Just who was this young man, and what lessons can we learn about ourselves from learning about his life? And we'll also note one other thing, and this is for you records history people in the room. These signatures don't really exist anymore. In the work that we do for the court's office, we're moving towards electronic filing for really everything. So we are at a time right now where if one of you ends up becoming Chief Justice or President in this room, there's dwindling chances we'll ever find an original signature of your time when you were younger and just starting out. So that's an additional context to the work that we've done here, why we're so proud that Jason was able to find this. But as we think about Taft, and as we delve into the foundational question about what lessons we can learn about him, a portrait began to emerge. He was, by all accounts, a man of great integrity and ethics, and a man fully devoted to the law. His life's work would be known by his consistency in philosophy as a politician and jurist and attorney, a consistency that seems almost foreign to us in our modern moment. He was also, as we all are, a product of the context of our times. But no matter who he became, his reputation and relationships were molded by that context, by learning to be a lawyer in the 6th largest city in our nation at that time, as it struggled to pull itself back together after it burned, less than 2 decades after the nation sought to stitch itself back together after a bloody civil war raged on Cincinnati's doorstep. So for the next few minutes, I'll share a little bit about Taft as a young lawyer so that we can understand the significance and rarity of the signed document that Jason found. After graduating law school, a second in his class in 1878 from Yale, he attended Cincinnati Law School. During this time, he worked as a court reporter for the Cincinnati Commercial. Historian Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote of his time in Taft's life in her book, The Bully Pulpit, that Taft covered all sorts of cases during his time as a writer. And as Kearns Goodwin explains of his column, he wrote in a clear, straightforward style, emphasizing the facts of the cases without embellishment. Judges. Taft started as an assistant Hamilton County prosecutor on October 1880, held that position until 1882. Biography Henry F. Pringle wrote that Taft worshipped the law. No understanding of him is possible without the appreciation of that fact. After working diligently as a prosecutor for 2 years, Taft accepted the position of Collector of Internal Revenue for Ohio's 1st District, appointed by President Chester Arthur in 1882. However, he resigned after only 1 year, as he did not want to cave to political pressure in having to replace competent employees with undeserving party favorites. And in 1883, Taft began his work in private practice. Jason made reference to this, but one huge event that no doubt impacted Taft at this time happened on the night of March 28, 1884. Around 10,000 angry citizens marched from Cincinnati Music Hall, venting their frustration after a series of events by targeting the county jail. By the evening of March 29th, they had turned their wrath toward the courthouse, setting it ablaze. Tragedy unfolded over the course of several nights, leaving 56 people dead and over 300 injured. To comprehend the full magnitude of this tragedy, we must understand the underlying factors that led to such unrest. The riot was the culmination of years of corruption among local politicians, soaring crime rates, abysmal labor conditions, and profound lack of faith in the local judicial system. The Montreal Herald aptly noted that weak law enforcement had played a significant role in allowing such circumstances to fester. This was also a time that American cities were being reorganized into downtowns and residential suburbs, and that the full impact of the long recession and the flowering of the factory system was reorganizing the nature of work. People no longer understood where they lived or where they worked. These underlying issues fueled disruption and violence all over America, such as the Chicago Haymarket riot in 1886. Concern with the crime wave was a way of expressing confusion. The incident's immediate trigger occurred on Christmas Eve of 1883, when William Berner, a young white German, and his accomplice Joe Palmer of mixed race, robbed and murdered their employer, William Kirk. After their arrest, the jury selection process took an astounding 500 potential jurors before Berner's lawyer, T.C. or Tom Campbell, finally accepted the jury of 12. In early January 1884, one of the two attorneys appointed by the court to represent Joseph Palmer was none other than William Howard Taft. In mid-January, citing his busy civil practice, he requested that Judge Stanley Matthews allow him to withdraw from the case, a request that was granted. As Berner's trial came to an end on March 26, 1884, the jury delivered a manslaughter verdict. The verdict outraged the community, particularly due to the testimony of witnesses who attested to Berner's admission of his premeditated and murderous act. The presiding judge, upon sentencing Berner, openly denounced the verdict as a damned outrage. Quote. Berner's accomplice was tried separately, convicted, and subsequently hanged. Over 100 years worth of governmental and legal records were incinerated in a single night. The courthouse housed not only courtrooms, but also the offices of various county departments and the law library. Accounts tell of the Hamilton County Recorder Dave, where are you? Dave Pinger, County Recorder's Office is here. Accounts tell the Hamilton County Recorder desperately tossing deed books out of the upper floor windows in a frantic attempt to salvage some records. And in fact, as a tour that we've taken at the Geyer Center, we were able to actually see some of those. Dave was with us there. During the following months that ensued after the burning of the courthouse, William Howard Taft and the rest of the judicial system in Hamilton County needed to keep cases moving and businesses continuing as usual. In the document that was found that you see on display today, it shows some sort of civil judgment for money that was owed. Throughout Kearns Goodwin's book, The Bully Pulpit, really focuses on the relationship and lives of Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, especially in their later years. It does shed some light on Taft's time as an attorney in 1884. Kearns Goodwin gives a fascinating account of Taft's feelings around William Howard's lawyer, Tom Campbell, as he was the corrupt attorney who bribed jurors to get a lesser sentence for his client. He was indicted for bribing jurors shortly after the 1884 riot, but eventually was acquitted. Shortly after, Taft was chosen to assist the Cincinnati Bar Association in their quest to have Campbell disbarred. According to the book, he, quote, relished the chance to confront the man who had thrown the bar of Hamilton County into disrepute. During the trial, he argued that the members of the Cincinnati Bar Association were actuated by no other motive than a desire that the profession should be purged of a man whose success in this community threatens every institution of justice that is dear to us or necessary to good governance. Despite his passionate and well-researched arguments, Campbell was exonerated and allowed to keep his practice. This experience certainly informed Taft's drive to put perfect argument forward during every trial several years later in his work as Solicitor General of the United States, where he would argue 18 cases in front of the Supreme Court and win 15 of them. This experience was also likely foundational in establishing Taft's deep devotion to ethics and integrity, a devotion that followed him throughout his life and into the chambers of the United States Supreme Court. The riot of 1884, which occurred again in the 6th largest city in the United States, made news around the globe at a time when information traveled much more slowly than today, and likely impacted the paths of many young voters at that time. Much in the same way, in a modern moment, we can think of the summer of 2020, the murder of George Floyd, the ensuing civil unrest, the prosecution of the police officers caught on film. One cannot understand the sociology of the practice of criminal law in 1884 or 2024 completely divorced from the context of those two events. In the meantime, this portrait of a young lawyer wanting to leave his mark on his community shows us who Taft would become. Like any recipe, the ingredients were already there long before the cake was baked. Steadfast devotion to the law, ethics, and justice, balanced against the deep influence of those who would be his closest friends and allies. In 1887, he was appointed to the Superior Court of Cincinnati, being one of the youngest ever appointed to the court. As you can see by this document that we found in our microfilm files, he was confirmed March 1887. He would have been 29 years old. This appointment set him on the career path that would eventually lead him to the presidency and later his ultimate goal, the United States Supreme Court. From his attempts to fight injustice in Cincinnati and root out corruption within our legal system in the late 19th century, the ideological consistency that he showed throughout his career and his focus on ethical leadership deserves to be emulated to this day. And as we look toward our modern bench bar, or truly any organizational or political leader in our midst, we should demand that they follow Taft's example of living and leading with integrity. Or even if they do not, we should hold ourselves accountable to the value we ascribe to ethical leadership and lead by example. Put simply, courage matters, honor matters, integrity matters. On the campaign trail this year, Vice President Kamala Harris has become quite fond of quoting her mother. Some of you will like this. You exist in the context of all of which you live and what came before you. Regardless of whether we individually think that any candidate for president or vice president upholds Taft's ethics, we must at least acknowledge that they are all products of the stories of their lives. From real estate and business, to military service, to being an educator, being a prosecutor, the four lives of our current candidates tell the stories of so many in our country, categorically different from each other, yet all leading to the same moment. They were raised across our country by families of all different backgrounds and means, and yet they now present themselves in front of all of us to represent all of us. but they are also products of the defining domestic or international moments of their youths. For the boomers, Vietnam War, the exodus of the 80s, for Gen X, the fall of the Soviet Union, and the birth of the internet and the information age in the 90s. And for millennials, those few of us floating around here, the global war on terror and the Great Recession. And for all of them and for all of us, as we pay our respects this week to the attacks of September 11, 2001. Those attacks may serve as a watershed moment that casts a shadow across all our contexts, no matter who we are. Each of them, like each of us, exists as a culmination of their own achievements, but also the environments within which each one was raised and the relationship they valued over the years. Each one of them, like each one of us, represents a fundamentally American story. But for each one of them, unlike for most of us, except for I think me in this room, their story writes its next chapter at a ballot box in November, just like Chief Justice and President William Howard Taft. A story which began on these grounds where he was born and was nurtured amongst the pension bar of Hamilton County, where his spirit for justice and integrity grew. Thank you again to Taft Law and the Friends of the Taft Legacy. Your work in preserving the memory of this great Cincinnatian does not go unnoticed. As we celebrate his life and legacy, may we hope his example serves to inspire and cultivate the next generation's Taft from our community. May we all strive to live such a life in service of our ideals, our integrity, our community,